Have you ever noticed how life doesn't change gently? How it doesn't warn you? How instead of opening doors, it starts closing them one by one? How right before something new begins, everything familiar begins to crumble? How relationships strain, motivation fades, certainty disappears, and the world you trusted suddenly feels unstable. And in those moments, you ask yourself a quiet, terrifying question. Why now? Why, when I was finally ready, why does it feel like I'm losing everything instead of gaining something? And what if this collapse isn't a failure at all, but a signal? What if this moment when everything falls apart is not the end of your story, but the precise moment reality begins to rearrange itself around you? Life rarely announces transformation with clarity. It doesn't send invitations or offer reassurance. Instead, it often arrives disguised as loss, confusion, resistance, and collapse. And this is the part no one prepares you for. The strange moment where everything that once felt stable begins to loosen its grip, where routines lose meaning, relationships feel misaligned, motivation drops without explanation, and you begin to question whether you've made a terrible mistake or whether something deeper is unfolding beneath the surface. Because before reality changes, it doesn't expand. It compresses, it tightens, it removes. And this removal feels personal, even though it isn't. It feels cruel, even though it's precise. And what most people don't realize is that reality doesn't transform by adding something new on top of the old. It transforms by dismantling what can no longer coexist with who you are becoming. And this dismantling phase is the most misunderstood stage of change, the one that convinces people to quit, to retreat, to return to what is familiar, even when it no longer fits, because the mind interprets collapse as danger, as punishment, as proof that something has gone wrong, when in truth collapse is often evidence that something has finally gone right. Because when your internal identity begins to shift, when your values, perceptions, and self-concept start to realign, reality has only two options: adapt or resist, and before it adapts, it resists, not to stop you, but to test whether this new version of you is stable enough to exist without the old structures that once supported you. Because what you call stability was often just familiarity, and familiarity is comfortable even when it is limiting. So when life starts removing familiar patterns, it triggers fear, and fear whispers that you are losing control. But what's actually happening is that control is being transferred from the old version of you to the new one. And this transfer is never smooth. It feels like standing between two worlds, no longer belonging to who you were, not yet fully anchored in who you are becoming. And this in-between space is uncomfortable because it offers no identity to cling to, no clear answers, only uncertainty. And yet this uncertainty is not empty. It is charged, it is active, it is the field where reality recalibrates itself to match your evolving inner state. Because reality does not respond to your wishes, it responds to your identity. And when your identity shifts, the environment that once mirrored you must dissolve before a new one can form. And this dissolution is what people experience as everything falling apart. Jobs feel wrong, goals lose meaning, friendships drift, old desires stop motivating you, and you begin to feel detached from the life you built. Not because it was bad, but because it was built for someone you are no longer becoming. And the universe, or reality if you prefer a neutral word, cannot support two conflicting identities at the same time. It cannot sustain the old structure once the foundation has changed. So it initiates a process of subtraction, removing supports that no longer align, creating friction, resistance, and delay. And this delay is intentional, because delay reveals attachment. It exposes whether you are committed to transformation or merely attracted to its idea. Because when everything is comfortable, it is easy to say you want change. But when comfort is removed, when the familiar dissolves, when certainty disappears, only then does your true commitment surface. And many people interpret this phase as failure and retreat just before reality completes its shift, because collapse feels like regression, even when it is progress. And this is why so many transformations stall at the same point. Not because the universe refuses to deliver, But because the individual refuses to let go, refuses to release the old identity that no longer fits, and clings to what is breaking instead of allowing it to break completely. Because something deeper understands that once it breaks, there is no going back, and this fear of irreversibility keeps people suspended in cycles of almost change, endless preparation, endless waiting, endless searching, never fully stepping into the unknown long enough for reality to reorganize itself around them. Because reality responds to what you embody, not what you hope for, and embodiment requires consistency under pressure. It requires remaining aligned, even when results disappear, even when signs reverse, even when nothing seems to be working. And this is the test no one talks about. The phase where manifestation looks like loss, where alignment feels like isolation, where growth feels like confusion, because the old identity is dissolving, but the new one has not yet stabilized. And during this phase, the mind searches desperately for meaning, for reassurance, for evidence that this is worth it. And when none appears, doubt fills the silence. But doubt is not a signal to stop. It is a signal that the old self is fighting to survive. Because the old self thrives on familiarity, on predictability, on repetition. And when it senses its relevance fading, it creates fear, urgency, nostalgia, regret, anything to pull you back into the known. And if you misinterpret this resistance as intuition, you retreat. But if you recognize it as withdrawal symptoms of an outdated identity, you can remain still long enough for the transition to complete. Because once the old structure fully collapses, something remarkable happens. Clarity begins to return, opportunities align without force. Connections feel effortless, momentum rebuilds naturally, and what once felt chaotic suddenly makes sense. Not because you forced change, but because you allowed reality, the time and space it needed to reorganize itself around who you had already become internally. And this is the moment people describe as a breakthrough. But what they don't see is that the breakthrough was not sudden. It was preceded by a long, quiet dismantling, by nights of doubt, days of confusion, and moments where quitting would have been easier than continuing. And this is why those who persist emerge fundamentally changed, not just externally, but internally, because they no longer rely on circumstances for validation. They no longer interpret resistance as rejection. They understand that collapse is not the opposite of creation, but its prerequisite. And once you understand this, the way you experience difficulty changes. Challenges no longer feel personal. Delays no longer feel like denial. Loss no longer feels like punishment. It feels like information. Feedback from reality, showing you which parts of your life are incompatible with where you are headed. And when you stop resisting this feedback and start cooperating with it, transformation accelerates, not because you control reality, but because you stop conflicting with it. And this is the paradox most people never grasp, that the moment you stop trying to hold everything together is the moment everything begins to rearrange itself in your favor. Because reality does not need you to manage it. It needs you to trust the process long enough to complete itself. And if you are in a phase where things are falling apart, where nothing feels stable, where the future feels uncertain, and the past no longer fits, it may not be because you are failing. It may be because you are standing at the exact threshold, where reality prepares to change, and the only thing required of you now is not effort, not force, not control, but endurance, the ability to remain aligned without evidence, to remain steady without reassurance, to allow the collapse to finish so that something sure can finally take its place.